Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a completely fresh look at reading, writing, and the stories behind how we actually learn. We're going to explore a deeply human concept that builds a bridge between our personal identities and the wider world, the literacy narrative. Let's get right into it. So, let's start by challenging a basic assumption. When you hear the word literate, what pops into your head? Most people instantly picture reading words on a page. You know, a traditional classroom, a heavy textbook, maybe a Friday spelling test. But is that really the whole picture? Think about your own life for a second. Think about the different ways you communicate, the tools you use, and the spaces you navigate every single day. Because honestly, look at how much our world has changed. We live in this incredible, modern, multimedia, and kinesthetic environment now. Today, literacy includes understanding digital interfaces, visual arrangements, and even social competence. It's really about how you interpret and compose messages. That could mean coding a website, reading a piece of sheet music, or analyzing a really complex data set on a tablet. Literacy is just competence in communication, whatever form that happens to take. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. When you combine this expansive, modern view of communication with the fundamental human tradition of storytelling, you get what's called a literacy narrative. It's a profoundly personal account of a learning experience. It isn't just some dry timeline of how you learned a new skill. Oh no, it's the story of how that specific skill fundamentally changed your relationship with the world around you. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. Redefining modern literacy. 2. Language, identity, and culture. 3. The power of learning. 4. Elements of storytelling. And finally, 5. Drafting your own narrative. Section 1. Redefining modern literacy, beyond reading and writing. UNESCO officially understands literacy as a means of communication in an increasingly digital, text-heavy, and fast-changing world. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. It is never achieved in isolation. You don't just become literate in a vacuum. You achieve it through active, ongoing engagement with members of specific communities. We learn from and with each other. Section 2. Language, identity, and culture, the roots of expression. Notice how deeply language is tied to who we actually are. Our global village contains so many intersecting language identities, and every single time you communicate, you're signaling an aspect of your own identity. Think about it. You definitely speak differently with your best friends than you do with your grandparents, right? You use a completely different tone when you're texting a buddy compared to writing a formal email at work. We are all constantly shifting between varieties of English to signal specific cultural identities. And that brings us to a fantastic term, your idiolect. This is your unique, totally personal way of speaking and writing. It draws heavily on your cultural background, and it shifts depending on the specific rhetorical situation you find yourself in. Recognizing that we all have these multiple, intersecting identities and ways of expressing ourselves is a game changer. No single variety of English is appropriate for every single situation, and learning a new literacy doesn't mean you ever have to abandon your old ones. Section 3. The power of learning, high-stakes awakenings. To really grasp the stakes here, let's look at Tara Westover's best-selling memoir, Educated. She beautifully contrasts the literacies she learned at home, things like preserving food, preparing herbs, and surviving in her family's dangerous junkyard on an Idaho mountain, with the academic literacies she gained later at college. Those new, science-based academic literacies created a profound, irreconcilable tension with her family's fundamentalist worldview. Acquiring that new literacy literally ruptured her relationship with her family because she absolutely refused to view her newfound knowledge as inferior to theirs. For Helen Keller, the stakes were internal and deeply, deeply emotional. Being deaf and blind since she was a toddler, she lived in what she called a still, dark world. But everything changed when her teacher, Anne Sullivan, pumped cool water over one of her hands while spelling W-A-T-E-R into the other. Keller suddenly understood that everything had a name. As she wrote, that living word awakened her soul. It wasn't just about learning to spell, it was a literal awakening that gave her foundational access to language itself. Our third incredible example is Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery. In his autobiography, he describes the exact moment he realized what literacy truly meant. His enslaver, Mr. Auld, actively forbade his wife from teaching Douglass to read, straight up stating that learning would make an enslaved person unmanageable and unfit. Slaveholders knew perfectly well that literacy was a direct threat to the entire institution of oppression. Douglass famously used this bitter opposition as his primary inspiration. It clicked for him.
What his enslavers dreaded most, he should desire most. He understood right then and there that education and slavery were entirely incompatible, and that literacy was the ultimate pathway to his freedom. So he went on to teach himself, and eventually to teach others. Talk about the power of learning. Section 4, Elements of Storytelling, the Architecture of Story. Okay, so how do we actually build stories like these? Well, every strong literacy narrative relies on fundamental storytelling architecture. You need characters the audience can connect with, a vivid setting that grounds us in a specific time and place, and, most importantly, a central tension or problem that demands a resolution. Think about following that tension from exposition to resolution. You start by setting the scene, then comes the rising action. Picture Helen Keller, frustrated, struggling with the doll, and eventually breaking it in a passionate outburst. That tension builds and builds right up to the climax, the cool water rushing over her hand at the well house. And that's followed by the falling action and the final resolution, where she lies in bed, completely eager for a new day. When you sit down to plan your own story, using a graphic sequence chart is incredibly helpful. It lets you map out characters, action, and dialogue across interconnected events. This helps you plot the specific vignettes of your learning experience in a logical, really engaging order. You get to visually track the rising conflict, ensuring every scene points directly toward your central theme. And as you map those events, you've got to remember the golden rule of writing: show, don't tell. Mimic masterful authors like Douglas and Keller. Utilize vivid sensory details, like Keller describing the warmth of the afternoon sun and the sweet smell of honeysuckle covering the porch, or Douglas describing the literal bread he traded to hungry local boys in exchange for the bread of knowledge. Use engaging language and dialogue to completely immerse your reader in the scene. Make them feel like they are right there with you. Section 5. Drafting your own narrative. The viewer's turn. Now, before you write a single sentence of your own narrative, you absolutely must define your rhetorical situation. Ask yourself the big questions. Who are you as the author in this specific context? What is your core message? Exactly who is your audience? What is your purpose here? Are you informing, persuading, or entertaining? What format are you using? And what are the broader cultural assumptions at play? Trust me, clarifying all of this first will save you hours of rewriting later. Once you know your rhetorical situation, just remember that good writing is a remarkably messy process. It really is. Your first draft is completely allowed to be terrible. Just get it down without worrying about perfection. Then lean heavily on the peer review phase. Share it with someone to gather honest, constructive feedback. And finally, do your revisions. Make those big, global, structural changes, and then zoom in for the local grammar polishes. Ultimately, the absolute most important part of this entire process is establishing the true significance of your story. This is the so what factor. Your audience needs to understand exactly why this learning moment mattered so much to you. It shouldn't just be a list of things that happened. It needs to show a real transformation. How did acquiring this specific literacy alter your perspective, change your physical circumstances, or shift your identity? So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to spark your own pre-writing right now. Think about it. What unique literacy, whether it was learning to read, mastering a complex digital tool, understanding a brand new cultural landscape, or perfecting a physical skill, completely changed how you see the world? And more importantly, how are you going to use the architecture of story to share that immense power with others?